the result of an unethical relationship between a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law. In 2023, Lai, now 18 years old, was caught in a dispute over a massive inheritance worth 500 million NT dollars. However, as soon as he received the entire fortune from his grandfather, a tragedy struck. Lai mysteriously passed away just one day after his father's funeral. The police could not determine whether it was a suicide or if there was foul play. From the beginning, investigators faced countless difficulties. The deeper they investigated, the more complex and unpredictable factors emerged, including a fake same-sex marriage used to protect the identities of certain family members. Did Lai truly die in an accident, or was there someone who planned his murder to seize the inheritance? The questions gradually unraveled as evidence began to surface. Subscribe to the channel and stay tuned to uncover this shocking mystery. At noon on January 4, 2023, the police in Baidun District, Taichung City, Taiwan, received an emergency call reporting a young man lying motionless on the street, having fallen from an upper floor. When the police and emergency responders arrived at the scene, they found that the victim showed no signs of life. Upon closer examination, investigators discovered a distinct dent beneath the victim's body, likely caused by the impact of a heavy object. This led them to suspect suicide by jumping. However, no identification documents were found. The most urgent task was to identify the victim. However, following protocol, the body was transported to the funeral home for preservation, awaiting forensic examination. While registering the body, the funeral home director suddenly recognized the deceased's familiar face. Upon recollection, the director was shocked to realize that just a few days ago, this young man had visited the funeral home to bid farewell to his grandfather. He was Lai, who attended the funeral as the direct grandson. The funeral home director immediately contacted Lai's mother to confirm the identity. Lai's mother, Mrs. Tran, was in shock upon receiving the news and rushed to the funeral home, confirming that the lifeless body was indeed her son. Within just 1 year, her family had to arrange 2 funerals, one for her father-in-law and one for her son. These tragedies devastated her spirit. Mrs. Tran's family lived on the 10th floor of an apartment building. That morning, her son was still healthy and had even purchased a new motorcycle to meet friends. But just a few hours later, he was gone forever. While she was preparing for her son's funeral, a stranger suddenly arrived holding a marriage certificate, demanding full inheritance rights as Lai's spouse. Mrs. Tran was stunned when she looked at the marriage document. Mrs. Tran recalled that, in the morning, her son was still healthy and had even purchased a new motorcycle to meet friends. But just a few hours later, he was gone forever. And the biggest revelation of all was the identity of Lai's spouse, a 24-year-old man named Chia. Something was definitely off because Chia was not a complete stranger in this case. He was on the 10th floor, the same apartment complex where Lai was found dead. Chia's father was a real estate lawyer who had handled the transfer of over 30 properties from Lai's grandfather, transferring them to his grandson. Despite coming from different backgrounds, Lai and Chia, being of the same age and having similar personalities, became close friends. But how did this friendship turn into love? In fact, Lai had always shown interest in women. He had frequently introduced girlfriends to his family. This raised many doubts in Mrs. Tran's mind. The situation became even more complicated when, after the incident, a woman suddenly came forward, claiming to be Chia's actual girlfriend. She and Chia had been in a relationship for nearly 2 years, a fact acknowledged by both friends and their families. What was already confusing became even more tangled. That morning, Mrs. Tran clearly remembered that her son had received a phone call from Chia, his newly registered spouse. Chia asked Lai to bring his identification documents and meet up to learn about real estate. But no one expected that this real estate lesson would quickly turn into a marriage. They didn't even have time to change clothes. There were no wedding outfits, no rings, no flowers. Their witness was just a random stranger they pulled off the street. Later, this witness recalled that Chia, the older man, had rushed up to him, pleading for help, saying their love was not accepted by both families. Out of sympathy and admiration, the witness agreed. and so, at 9 a.m. that day, they legally became spouses. According to the forensic report, Lai's estimated time of death was around 11 a.m., just 2 hours after the marriage. Since Lai did not leave a will, this meant that under legal provisions, Chia, as his lawful spouse, was entitled to inherit at least 250 million NT dollars from Lai's estate. But Chia was not the only one drawn by the lure of this fortune. Even before Lai's cause of death was determined, 4 other relatives of the Lai family appeared, each claiming inheritance rights. These individuals were the biological children of Lai's grandfather, making them Lai's uncles and aunts. All 4 claimed that their father's fortune had been entirely transferred to Lai, while the second generation, the biological children of their father, had received nothing. This made them all suspect that the will could be fake. As such favoritism seemed impossible. The police found themselves in a difficult situation when handling the case, and with the current clues they could not make any definitive conclusions. However, with years of experience handling family-related cases, investigators determined that focusing on family relationships would be the key to unlocking the truth. According to revealed information, Lai's grandfather and his legal wife had 3 daughters and 2 sons. However, the second son had intellectual disabilities, struggled with daily life, and even marriage and family life were seen as difficult challenges. To resolve this issue, Lai's grandfather spent money on an international marriage brokerage service to find a wife for his son. In 1999, he paid a large sum to marry an Indonesian woman. After the marriage, she received monthly financial support from Lai's grandfather, but in reality, she was more of a caretaker for his second son. Soon after, she gave birth to a daughter for the Lai family. But because Lai's grandfather desperately wanted a male heir, he developed a dark plan. He decided to father a child himself, forcing his daughter-in-law to bear a son to continue the bloodline. This plan failed when the woman refused to engage in such an unethical relationship. She chose to divorce to save herself. However, Lai's grandfather did not give up. Sometime later, he found a Chinese woman, Mrs. Tran, and arranged for her to marry his son. Eventually, she stayed with the Lai family and gave birth to a boy, Lai, the future heir of the family's vast fortune. The dark secrets of the Lai family were exposed in 2006 when Lai's grandfather's legal wife accidentally caught her husband and daughter-in-law in bed together. More precisely, that day, when she returned from the market, she found the house door locked from the inside and heard incoherent female moaning sounds. Suspecting something was wrong, she climbed up the ventilation opening to look inside. What she saw left her stunned. Her own husband was having an affair with their daughter-in-law. Normally, a woman in such a situation would cause a scandal. But because her life depended entirely on her husband, she chose to turn a blind eye. 9 months later, Lai was born. By simply looking at him, she noticed he bore an uncanny resemblance to her husband rather than to her son. To confirm her suspicions, she secretly conducted a DNA test. As expected, Lai was indeed the result of her husband's illicit relationship with their daughter-in-law. In other words, the man Lai called father was actually his half-brother, and the man he called grandfather was, in fact, his biological father. Betrayed time and time again, she could no longer endure the situation and decided to file a lawsuit against Lai's grandfather and his daughter-in-law, accusing them of adultery. While awaiting trial, Lai's grandfather decided to go all in and no longer hide his actions. He brazenly expelled his legal wife from the house, an act that immediately angered the rest of the children. All of them, who were mentally and physically healthy, stood by their mother and condemned their father as a shameless man who had destroyed moral order. Lai's grandfather did not take this lightly and expelled anyone who spoke ill of him from the family home. In the end, in the massive family estate, only his intellectually disabled son, his daughter-in-law with whom he had an affair, and Lai, the boy who was legally his grandson but was actually his son, remained. For reasons unclear, whether out of deep affection or obsession, Lai's grandfather gradually transferred all of his assets and properties to the boy, who was then still an infant. Due to the undeniable DNA evidence, the court found Lai's grandfather and daughter-in-law guilty of adultery. Each received a 3-month prison sentence, and a monetary fine. It seemed like the case had reached its conclusion, but at that time, Taiwan's legislative yuan was engaged in heated debates about whether the criminalization of adultery was unconstitutional. This development came at the perfect moment for Lai's grandfather, as his case was suspended. As a result, both he and his daughter-in-law escaped serving their sentences. Around this same period, Lai's intellectually disabled uncle fell seriously ill and passed away in 2008. After his son's death, Lai's grandfather and his daughter-in-law no longer had any moral constraints. He even went through legal procedures to adopt Lai, officially changing his status from grandson to son to settle inheritance matters. The transfer of assets took place discreetly but steadily over more than a decade. By the time Lai turned 18, all of the family's wealth was legally under his name, making him a young billionaire. By the end of April 2023, Lai's grandfather passed away at the age of 83. Because he had transferred his assets earlier, he successfully avoided the enormous inheritance tax. However, what no one expected was that just 1 week after his grandfather's death, Lai also passed away. In the end, the massive 500 million NT dollar fortune still ended up as inheritance. According to Taiwan's civil code, the inheritance priority follows this order: spouse, children, parents, and then siblings. However, Lai's siblings were only half-siblings from his father's side, so their inheritance rights were even lower on the priority list. Even if they pursued legal action to claim the inheritance and won, after deducting all the legal and attorney fees, the remaining amount would be negligible. Instead of wasting time on disputes, Lai's siblings chose to let things go and allow the situation to unfold naturally. However, the two parties with the largest claim to the fortune were unlikely to back down easily. Since Lai had no children, according to inheritance law, his fortune would be divided between his legal spouse, Ha, and his biological mother, Mrs. Tran. If nothing changed, they would each receive half. However, Mrs. Tran refused to accept this. She believed that her son was not only deceived into marriage but was also murdered. According to Mrs. Tran, Chia's father, who had handled all of their family's legal documents, had full knowledge of their wealth. She suspected that he encouraged Chia to seduce and marry Lai, then orchestrated his murder to seize the inheritance. Even half of the 500 million NT dollars was a fortune. This theory was supported by veteran forensic expert Mr. Cao Daicheng. With over 30 years of experience and more than 10,000 cases examined, he noticed something suspicious the moment he saw Lai's body. The first suspicious detail was the landing position of the body. If Lai had truly jumped, the trajectory should have formed a small parabolic arc, meaning his body should have landed at least 3 meters from the building. However, in reality, Lai's body was found right next to the building, only a few dozen centimeters away. This led Mr. Cao Daicheng to suspect foul play. Some forensic experts proposed an alternative theory. Lai may have stood on the outer balcony railing and jumped straight down, or he may have clung to the railing, suspended in midair, before falling when his strength gave out. If this were the case, his fall wouldn't follow a parabolic arc. However, near the second floor of the building, there was a protruding rain cover. If Lai had fallen straight down from a great height, the force of impact should have bounced him outward after hitting the rain cover, making his final landing position inconsistent with the actual findings. With authorization from the family, forensic expert Cao Daicheng obtained Lai's emergency and autopsy reports. He identified 4 major inconsistencies: 4 needle marks on Lai's right arm, a drag mark on his left wrist, strangulation marks on his neck, and bite bruises inside his lips. According to Mr. Cao, all of these injuries occurred before Lai's death. The most suspicious was the last mark, the strangulation mark and bite bruises, typically seen in cases of asphyxiation. This suggested that Lai might have been attacked, then injected with a drug that could paralyze the heart. While Lai was in a semi-conscious state, the perpetrator could have pushed him from a lower floor rather than from the 10th floor, where Chia was staying. Neighbors living on the 10th floor stated that on the day of the incident, they did not hear any arguments or sounds of a struggle. In his testimony, Chia claimed that after having a few drinks together, he went to the bathroom to wash his face. When he came out, Lai was gone. Assuming he had left, Chia thought nothing of it. Strangely, when the police arrived at the scene, Chia was not among the crowd that had gathered. However, when questioned by the police, he displayed a cold and detached demeanor when asked if he knew the victim. Chia remained completely silent, showing no emotion over the loss of his newlywed partner. Surveillance footage from the building's elevator showed both of them going up to the 10th floor at around 10 p.m. In the video, they did not speak or make any physical contact while in the elevator. The case gained widespread attention and became a hot topic of discussion. Due to mounting public pressure, the prosecutor's office was forced to release a new forensic report clarifying the suspicions surrounding Lai's death and the complex relationships in the case. On June 6th, the official forensic report confirmed that Lai's death was consistent with a high fall, with no evidence of homicide. The report also systematically refuted each of the suspicions previously raised by forensic expert Cao Daicheng. The prosecutor's report emphasized that Lai had multiple rib fractures and severe internal organ damage from the fall, contradicting Mr. Cao's earlier findings. Additionally, the police conducted over 1,000 toxicology tests on Lai's blood samples, all of which came back negative. His blood alcohol level was also 0. Regarding the needle marks on his arm, forensic analysis suggested they were likely caused by intravenous injections administered by emergency medical personnel during resuscitation efforts. Similarly, the bite marks inside his mouth and bruises on his neck were concluded to be injuries sustained during emergency treatment, specifically when paramedics forcefully inserted an intubation tube. The police also found fingerprints, DNA traces, and scratch marks on the outer railing of the 10th floor balcony. Based on this evidence, they hypothesized that Lai had climbed over the railing but accidentally lost his grip and fell, without any external force involved. As for the unusual landing position, the police offered an explanation. There were impact marks on the rain cover below the building, while Lai's back also had 2 scratches that aligned with the sharp edges of the rain cover. Nearby tree branches showed signs of breakage, leading to the conclusion that Lai might have first hit the rain cover, bounced upward, collided with a tree branch, and then was further deflected before ultimately landing near the building. Based on these findings, on June 21st, the Taichung District Prosecutor's Office officially announced the closure of the case. They did not prosecute Ha's family due to a lack of direct evidence linking them to a crime. However, this ruling did not pacify public opinion. Instead, it further fueled controversy and outrage. Many questioned why, if Chia admitted that they had been drinking together, Lai's blood alcohol test showed a 0% alcohol level less than an hour later. This seemed impossible. Moreover, the most puzzling aspect was why Lai would choose to end his life at this moment, right after inheriting a massive fortune and getting married. What was the reason? In such cases, the victim would almost always leave a will or some kind of message. As public suspicion grew, both Chia and his father remained silent. It took over a month before they issued a brief statement to the media. In their statement, they emphasized that public speculation did not reflect the full truth, and that all conclusions should be based on judicial investigation results. They also mentioned Lai's mother, arguing that her statements were purely personal opinions and did not represent the objective reality of the case. Many unanswered questions still surrounded this case. In particular, the resurfacing of the affair between Lai's mother and his grandfather stirred public outrage once again. The latest news regarding this case revealed that, although the prosecutor's office decided not to indict Chia and his father, they also ruled that the marriage between Chia and Lai was invalid due to false registration information. This ruling meant that Chia's chances of inheriting half of the fortune were almost 0. However, Lai's mother refused to give up on holding Chia accountable. In March 2023, she authorized a lawyer to file an appeal against the decision not to prosecute Chia for murder. On May 28th, the Taichung Supreme People's Procuratorate reopened the case for further investigation. The case was officially reassigned on June 4th upon the completion of procedural documents. On June 28th, 2024, the Taichung District Court found that Chia had engaged in a fraudulent marriage with a high school student named Lai and sentenced him to 1 year and 6 months in prison for falsifying documents. The sentence could not be converted to a fine. In other words, the marriage registration seen at the beginning of the video was fake. Chia had fabricated it with someone else who had the same name, Lai. The case remains appealable until May 23, 2025. The first instance court rejected Chia's appeal, upheld the initial verdict, and scheduled the final hearing for May 3, 2025. Chia was officially taken into custody to serve his sentence. In the end, after months of controversy, the secrets of Lai's family gradually unraveled. What began as a mysterious death evolved into a complex story of family, power, and dark ambitions. Lai, a young man, was crushed under immense pressure from his own family, ultimately paying the ultimate price, his life. Although the case has been legally closed, its repercussions will continue. The tangled relationships, lingering suspicions about Chia's actions, and the unanswered mysteries surrounding Lai's death remain unsolved. The individuals involved in this case not only faced legal consequences, but also had to endure lasting psychological and social repercussions for the rest of their lives. This concludes the video. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can bring you more strange and emotional stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. See you in the next video. See you in the next video.